We do have a quorum. So I'm going to gavel the meeting to order. Good morning, and I appreciate everyone being here this morning. I know we have other things pressing us, but this is important too, and I appreciate everyone's willingness to be here and to discuss the business of the PAB. Just to going by the agenda here, there is a video of the previous meeting on the website. All the meetings are on the website, as you may be aware. Just to let you know, the next meeting is going to be September 8th at 10 a.m. in the morning. Okay. Just want to talk about the first real agenda item here on the agenda is a technical session that the PAB had back in April. And I supplied a handout entitled PAB Closed Admin Session for your review, I guess, or your information. And Bethany was nice enough to take notes. And so I want to point out some of the things that the PAB sort of talked about in our technical session back in April. One of the reasons why we met was to figure out what to do with the tracker, which we're now calling the complaint log. There was some difficulty in getting it onto the website in its current form. We went round and round with the IT guy. And it was decided that what we would do is, if folks want a copy of the tracker or the log, they can ask the state's attorney's office for a copy, and they will be provided one. This tracker is now kept up to date every month after we conduct an ACC meeting. Whatever the findings are, we put it into the tracker as to what it was, just a very high level cursory information about what it was and what the decision was. So if anyone wants a copy of it, the public, you can anytime you can ask for it, and Beth will send it out via email, I guess.
Bill, just real quick, just to clarify, it's the county attorney's, not the state's attorney.
Oh, county attorney, I'm sorry. I get it mixed up. And it was also decided that at the end of the year, when we do the end of the year report, we will turn it into a narrative the way we did the last time and incorporate it into the end of the year report. So I think that's pretty good as far as being as open as we could, given the limitations we have on the way it can be broadcast on the web. Okay. So once we got through that, I guess the ACC, we were able to talk about a few more things. Things like our mission and what should we do, what are we supposed to be doing, how can we further the efforts that we're charged to work with you all to improve policing. And so a lot of ideas came out of the meeting. Not going to go down through all of them. You can read them all for yourselves. But one of the things we were wondering about is the departments are supposed to have a victim's advocate. We don't, they're supposed to identify a victim's advocate. We didn't know whether all the departments had a victim's advocate or not, but that's something that we may look into, find out what's going on with that. Another issue we talked about was I guess we talked about a lot of things, but I want to try to boil this down. It seems to me it boils down, our conversations boils down to three things. One, we want to get the word out about the PAB, what it does, how it's working. One of the things that I can tell you is prior to having this position that I have now, 6 months ago, I didn't know a doggone thing about the PAB or what it does or the Accountability Act. I don't think most of the citizens of the county or even the state know that there even is a PAB or an ACC or this kind of a law. So one of the things we wanted to do is try to get the word out. And we didn't discuss a lot of ways that we're going to do that, but at some point, I think the PAB is going to meet again, and we're going to drill down into some of these things that seem to have come out of that meeting. The other thing is, we're charged with working with you all to improve policing in the county. And one of the things that we kind of talked about was, well, how do we know? How do we know that what the policing is in the county? We have no information available to us to tell us where we stand. And I think it's pretty good. But that's just that's just conjecture, just based on anecdotal evidence. So one of the things we want to do is we talked about, well, how do we find out how the people, the civilians feel about the policing, and how do we improve it from there? So we talked about doing a survey. We talked about other ways to find out, to create sort of a baseline so we can set some goals and objectives. So the third one would be setting the goals and objectives. The second one is find out, where we are, and the other one was getting the word out. So that's basically the gist of the PAB technical session that we had. Those are I guess, the three basic things that came out of it. And I think the PAB is going to meet again and maybe drill down on some of these things that we felt were important. Any other members? Am I getting that? Did I leave anything?
No, I think you covered it. The only thing I would expand on is and as far as what we're thinking, as far as the victim advocate in your department, something for you guys maybe to think about is really we're looking at that as a way to avoid potential complaints, right? When somebody can talk to them and they can say, well, tell me about whatever you're considering, because what we're noticing is that the trend, obviously you're getting a lot of professionalist, rudeness, and badly treated, which often end up unfounded, so if there's some way for somebody in the department that could take a role in your departments, it's obviously one of your officers or what have you, to kind of go through and say, I'm not sure this rises to the, level of a complaint, but maybe it's just a courtesy type situation. Might be able to avoid an actual complaint is the way I see it. I don't want you to feel like, oh, it's an advocate to fight. I think it could be a way to maybe eliminate, and also just, I think we're trying to get to that professional courtesy part where, you can find out what the issue is without potentially rising to the level of an unfounded complaint that has to go through the whole entire system. So does that sound like what we were thinking?
Yeah, I think at the last ACC meeting, I asked the sheriff's office if they had a victims advocate, and they said yes. It was a Colonel somebody.
Yeah.
There you go.
You're the victims
Colonel
advocate?
somebody,
Colonel somebody.
I'm sorry, sir.
It's okay, no, yes. As far as an advocate, yes, the complaints come through me.
Okay.
But I can tell you, once we get the complaint, and it's official complaint, we're kind of, for the legislature, we have to send it. It's too late at that point. If somebody would call me and would say, look, I need to talk to you about Officer Smith, or Deputy Smith, or whatever, I kind of don't like the way he talked to me, certainly, but once we get that complaint and it's on the form, per the legislature, per the law, we have to send it out for investigation, so. But yes, I do field calls when people have some issues, I would be the person.
That's probably the case for all of us, is I'm the victim's advocate for my department because I just don't have the staffing or the expertise of any other member of the department to fulfill that role. So I am the victim's advocate for my department.
And if I may comment, as chiefs, we used to have that latitude to, or supervisors actually, what can I do for you, sir? and we listened to them, and, you know, we could very often say, well, you know what, they haven't violated a policy, they haven't violated a law, and I'm very familiar with the officer. Are you telling me he was courteous, or did he, you know, no, he was very courteous, and ultimately, you guys are spot on, and I really appreciate you identifying this sort of glitch in this system, and that is, they just don't kind of like it. I mean, you can, you know, like something, I was just talking to Chief Spalding before. As an example, we had a guy with no front tag. I mean, that's, you know, cut and dry. And he wants to file a complaint. And do you admit that you didn't have a front tag? Yes. Was the officer, you know, rude or whatever? No. You know, there's no policy, there's no procedure, there's no law. They had a good reason to stop you, you were treated well. Well, I want to file a complaint. And I'm seeing a pattern in that. It
Well,
will be-
sometimes we can't avoid those kind of things, but to your point, I think what we're trying to avoid is to get before the complaint process. So part of what we were discussing and getting some of the information out to people is to do a better job of identifying, like, so they know what constitutes a complaint, what would rise to the level of a complaint, start to do a better job of educating the public to maybe minimize these sort of unfounded and at the end of the day, if they want to complain and they want to file, we're not going to be able to stop that. We're going to have to run it through this process, but maybe we can get it to a point where it's, you know, less of the sort of headed off at the pass, where the citizen feels like they were heard, and then, you know, maybe explained the situation, which you obviously try to do. So, I mean, yeah. So and I think it's education. We were thinking people really don't know, like you said, people don't know what the process is, what really is a complaint worthy. So we want to do a better job, and then that's part of what's coming up on this sheet at the bottom there, creating some PDFs, some brochures, some stuff that we can hand out at events that say, this would not be a complaint. This would potentially be a complaint. Something that people could look at and say, well, okay, I better not. It's kind of going to be a waste of everybody's time to file something that doesn't rise to the level of a complaint. But right now, I think everybody's like, every concern gets to a complaint. And then we got to run it through the whole,
Can I comment on that again real quick?
yeah.
What you're talking about is accurate. We've talked about printing brochures and putting things on the website, and that's supposed to, one of my duties is to add those things to the website. But the victim's advocate is specifically in the legislation, and it's meant to be after a complaint is made. They have somebody within the department that they can contact and say, what's the status? Has it gone to the ACC? What's it?
Good point.
So that's the point, that each department should have somebody, even if it's not their job title, it should have somebody that the citizen can reach out to.
Well, thank you for that, because I was thinking maybe that person could help eliminate, but, so now we need to look
was
at this
more
a
of a
different way to
updater
educate them.
person,
Correct.
yeah.
All right, yeah, my apologies. Thank you for
And there's also a
clarifying that.
legislative requirement for the victim's rights advocate to contact the complainant within, I believe it's 72 hours with follow-up. So it's spelled out in the law. But I also agree with you, so it usually falls, it could be me, it could be a commander, it could be a supervisor. If somebody calls in, we categorize either an inquiry or a complaint. Now, if somebody calls in and says, hey, this happened to me on this traffic stop, and our supervisor, our commander, myself has a discussion with them, and we explain to them, this is the lawful procedure, and then they're okay with it at the end of that, then we will categorize that as an inquiry, close it as resolved at intake, and it doesn't go through the complaint process. If we go through the same thing and the individual's like, I don't care, I think it was improper, then we follow through, send it in as a complaint. Either way, we log it so that we have a record of how we handled it, whether it was an inquiry or a complaint, so that we can go back if somebody were to come back later and say, you know, this didn't get forwarded through or something, we would have that record of the fact that it was handled a certain way and why.
Well, I like that. I mean, that sounds like a good flow of it. I think making the public aware of some sort of flow or procedure. Maybe you reach out to the department first and inquire, because I think that would make more sense, and maybe eliminate. I think the goal was for us to identify these trends, and that seems to be the trend, is we're getting this one of the top trends, so, anyway.
So is it my understanding that in most cases, the chief is the victim's advocate? Is there somebody identified as the victim's advocate? Is it whoever feels like talking to the person? I mean, how do you guys decide who the victim's advocate is, and is it the same person? Anybody?
Typically, we do it with the investigator, all right? So we don't have, again, the size of resources. So whoever, typically it's one of the supervisors that's assigned to follow it up. So they would be the victim advocate. They would let them know, okay, this is where we're at in the process. This is where we're going to go with the process. Sometimes it's through email, sometimes it's through just phone conversations. But they take on that, sort of that dual role.
In my case, it's me, the chief.
You, sir?
As well.
We appoint somebody. It was Captain Schuster, somebody who knows the law, make sure we're following the timeframes that are spelled out within the legislation. And so they're appointed.
So in some cases, it's the chief, in some cases, it's the investigator, and in some cases, it's someone appointed according to the complaint. Is that? And in one case, it's the colonel. Is that correct? Am I correct?
I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the legislation just says that each department shall appoint a victim's rights advocate, and that person has to make contact within 72 hours, has to advise the complainant of the status of the case at this juncture. When the case is closed, within so many days, you have to provide them with the outcome of the case. So there are specific requirements that the VRA must do under the law within the process.
Okay.
But it just says that the agency shall appoint somebody. So in a smaller agency, the chief can appoint themselves.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, any other comments about the PAB technical session from anyone? All right, with that being the case, we'll move on to number 5. Tom?
Yes, I just wanted to touch on one thing about these complaints that maybe seem frivolous. And based on the input of the county sheriff's office, the ACC adopted an abbreviated adjudication process. And theoretically, somebody gets pulled over because they're missing a license plate, as an example. And they make a complaint that the officer was rude and unprofessional with them. So it could be a simple investigation where here's the facts, here's what happened, and here's a body-worn camera image. You can look at it, and we get a lot of these, and it's obviously didn't happen that way. So we tried to come up with a means to cut down on the amount of time spent on these frivolous complaints so the police can spend time on more important things, but yet still comply with the law. So we have a second process now that can be utilized. Now, if it needs a full investigation because it's something more serious, then they have to do the full-blown thing. I'm just going to touch here a minute on the last 3 months. So this is kind of a summary. When I say incident, an incident, for purposes of discussion here, is the reason for the call. Sometimes the incident involved more than one officer. So I'm trying to keep it simple. There were 7 incidents over the last 3 months involving 11 officers spread among the various police departments. In March, we had an incident with 2 officers from Hampstead. It was a complaint about unsafe driving, there were some other allegations made. And after looking at it and discussing it, there were no charges against the officers in that case. We had a second incident with a Hampstead officer. It was originally a county call. Hampstead came in support. What ended up happening, there was a very abusive, combative individual that was intoxicated, high on drugs, and was extremely abusive. He had done some damage to his arm by putting it through a window, so his arm was cut. So they put him into the ambulance, trying to perform medical attention, and he assaulted the officer. The officer, got him under control, and then there was a complaint made of excessive force. We found that the officer used the appropriate force in accordance with his training to subdue the guy, and there were no charges filed in that case. We had one incident in April that was a county sheriff. It was a police officer made a stop. The person alleged that there was no reasonable articulable suspicion or probable cause for the stop. It was in regard to a burnout light. We felt the officer, it was an honest mistake. It was very difficult to make the determination, but we did not charge the officer in that case. In May, we had 4 incidents involving 7 officers. The first was a Westminster case, kind of a domestic dispute issue behind the Days Inn. The allegation came that the husband had a gun and the father of the wife had a gun. The police came onto the scene very professionally, got everybody separated, did the searches, found no guns. They were able to de-escalate the situation and move on with life. The one complainant was a former state police officer who had a protective order against him because he had apparently hit his wife, made a complaint, basically improper tactics and other things. We made no finding against the 3 officers. That's what happens sometimes. There's one officer and there happens to be some support folks there. They get kind of thrown into this mix. So sometimes they're probably only guilty of being on the scene doing their job. They had no real participation in the event. We had another issue with from Hampstead, rude and unprofessional conduct. It was a visit by an officer to someone's house. It was some kind of rental dispute, and the landlord came. The landlord was intoxicated, and the police officer provided him a way to get home so he didn't have to drive his vehicle. And a few hours later, they saw that vehicle in Hampstead, and the officer pulled the vehicle over and found out that there was a lady driving. This fellow he had dealt with earlier got very abusive, and then 2 of his friends that were apparently watching a football game with him came onto the scene and got very abusive. The officer was extremely professional throughout all of this. We had no charges against the officer. There was an incident of a violation of state traffic law by an officer of Hampstead. We did charge in that case. It was a Category A, written counseling. And then we had one final case with Tawnytown. The police officer did a car stop. There was an improper tag on the car, not like a fake tag. He pulls the car over, and as he does a call-in on the vehicle, he finds out that this lady has a state police arrest warrant against her. So he cuffs her, takes care to do it properly, and determines that the arrest warrant is valid. It was for some sort of dispute in another jurisdiction. So he takes the lady to central booking, has the vehicle towed. The lady makes a complaint of, what was it? Improper car stop, excessive force for the handcuffing, and they destroyed her emotional, mental, and physical health by this stop. We found we didn't find against the officer. So that's just a quick summary of the cases for the last 3 months.
Thank you, Tom. Any updates on the ACC membership, or?
ACC membership's the same. We now have all of our members trained. So I'm still the chair. We have Bill as a member, as the PAB chair, Doug Smith, and we have Lee Esworthy and Michelle Denton. So that's our current, so we're up to speed and everybody's trained, and we, I think we have a good group right now.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Tom, from anyone? All right, thank you, Tom.
Well, I guess the one question, it's just, so it's only the sheriff's department that has the early process you were talking about?
No, it's available for all of the departments, and the other departments use that same process.
Oh,
They
okay.
proposed it, and we thought, this is a really good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
Because we,
I wasn't sure if everybody was using it. Okay.
yeah, if they can, if it fits the requirements, yes, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, moving right along. I want to talk a little bit about the PAB ACC complaint log, which you all have a copy of. I keep this thing up to date. After we have our ACC meetings, we put in the additional cases and their disposition, and we bring it up to date, and we put it on file with the county attorney's office. But I noticed when we updated it this last time that it now had 2 years of data. The first cases that the ACC, when they began hearing them, was back in May of 2023. So with the close of May of 2025, we had 2 years of data, and I thought it was a good idea maybe to sort of take stock of some of this data and try to crunch some numbers, try to come up with some trends as to, you know, what we're looking at now that we've got a couple of years. And so what I did was I created your next handout, was the complaint statistics, May 2023 to 2025 handout, which you have there in your handout package. And I just want to point out that I just crunched this data based on what it said to me. There's other things that, you know, you guys can look at this thing and crunch it and find out what it says to you, but here's kind of like the way I went on it. I basically took the complaints, and as Tom has pointed out, some of these complaints are a result of one incident. In last month, we had one incident that caused 3 complaints. So in order to make this thing fair, I went and I made sure that I counted incidents and not complaints. So in accordance with this log, there's 50 complaints, but there are only 43 incidences. And so I went and I used the incidents in my data analysis. And what I found was this. I didn't mention the names of the departments because I didn't want to call anybody out either way. But in Department A, which has a population of 176,639 people, we had 11 complaints. That's approximately 16,000 complaints per person. And I guess with the population that large, you can guess who that is. Department B.
Hopefully it's the other way around.
What do you mean?
16,000 complaints per person.
Oh, 16,000
be
persons
good.
per complaint, I'm sorry. So, Department B had a population of 44,000. They had 1 complaint. So that's approximately 44,000 persons per complaint. Not bad, not as good as Department A, but still pretty good. Department C had a population of 5,500. They had 2 complaints. That's a complaint ratio of 2,700 persons per complaint. Department D, population of 20,500, 10 complaints. That's approximately 2,000 complaints per person. Kind of in line with, not as good as Department A, but in line with some of the others above. Department E had a population of 7,400, 5 complaints. That's 1,480 persons per complaint. Not as good. And then, of course, Department F, bringing up the rear, a population of 6,395, 13 complaints. If you do the math, that's a complaint of 492 persons per complaint. So when you compare that, 492 persons per complaint, with Department A, 16,000 persons per complaint, I think there's a big difference. And I don't know why there's a big difference. I'm not making any judgments. It appears that Department A is pretty good in this analysis, but that's where the numbers that I crunched, that's what it leads me to believe that Department A is doing the best. But again, I don't know what the jurisdictional issues that may cause these numbers to be the way they are. One of the things I sought to do was, in order to try to find out a little bit more about why they could be the way they are, is I did an analysis of, I tried to categorize the complaints in the box down at the bottom. I tried to categorize them into different categories, and I came up with 7 categories. And I found that the first category, department policy violations, we had 14 complaints. Professionalism, rudeness, being badly treated, we had 11 complaints, and that's across all departments. Unauthorized search, Fourth Amendment, 10 complaints. Excessive use of force, 7 complaints. And then they sort of tail off as we get down to the last one, honesty. The other thing that goes with this particular analysis is, of the department policy violations, of the 14, 6 were administratively charged. 6 were found that there was enough evidence that they did what was complained about. Professionalism, of the number of complaints, 11, we only had 1 charge. Unauthorized search, we only had 1 charge. And the rest of the complaints, we had no charges. So just to point out, as I crunched the numbers, it looks like the biggie here for you all to consider is department policy violations. That is the one that garnered the most complaints. That's the one that garnered the most charges. So I guess if there's anything that needs to be worked on, that one could certainly be looked at. You know, the other thing I thought about as I crunched this data was, well, are a lot of these resulting from traffic stops? I don't know. I don't have the data in here that says a traffic stop versus something else. That's something I think I want to keep track of, because I have a feeling, then that's all it is, that traffic stops are maybe causing you guys to have more complaints, and maybe something could be done, but I don't know. I'm going to begin tracking traffic stops complaints versus non-traffic stops complaints and see where it goes. I'll be here for another year and a half, I think, I hope. And so I'll certainly keep that in mind as we move forward with the tracker. But that is kind of like the analysis that I did. And I would ask anybody if they have any comments about it.
I have a couple comments. I think one is it would also be helpful, like, for the top section to have the actual administratively charged against, you know, instead of just complaints, the actual ones that are administratively charged brought up, because I think that could change the dynamic quite a bit. The other thing about traffic stops, I tend to agree with you, and I noticed, I think I saw on some Facebook pages that there had been, it sounded like a really successful program recently regarding traffic stop education for autism. I'm not sure what departments dealt with it or who led it exactly, but there was some activity, I think, in the last few weeks. Am I correct in that? So as we, as a group, meet separately and talk about outreach, we may be reaching out to you as well to talk about how that went, how that might be able to be expanded, you know, and ideas from you as well on how we can best outreach to the community and what you're already doing. So really trying to share some of those best practices. So I think that we just wanted to make those couple of comments.
Well, the only thing that I can see, because, you know, our job is to identify trends, and part of identifying trends is to actually put a statistical number to it. So by going by your numbers we have here, we can say that 84% of the charges that were, of the complaints that went to the ACC were dismissed. We can also see that 12% of the complaints that went to the ACC were based on policy violations. That only leaves 4% for everything else across the board. 84% are dismissed, 12% are policy violations. So those are our numbers that we can identify now in 2 years' worth of trends.
Very good,
And I
thank you.
think it's also helpful that that be communicated to the officers as well for some of the, maybe some of the concerns early on about what this process was, how they might be, how that might demotivate them, things like that. I don't, interested in your feedback on that.
Yes, sir.
So I agree with you. I think if we're going to draw conclusions and point out conclusions about which department's doing well and which department is not doing well, I think that has to be based on sustained complaints, not unsubstantiated complaints. Because I have officers that are much more proactive than other officers, and they tend to get more complaints because people don't like the fact that they're getting written a citation or that they're getting arrested. If we start drawing inferences that those officers who are proactive are not doing as well as the officers who are not proactive because they're getting more complaints, we're going to have police officers that are going to go out and not do their job. So I think it's not really fair to draw an inference about a department as far as doing well or not doing well based on unsubstantiated complaints.
Good point, good point.
I'd like to follow that, and I totally agree with Tom, what he said. And, I mean, just to throw a wrench in it, you might say the department with the most complaints is doing the best because they're the most accessible and have advised the public how to contact them. So, yeah, I think it's really relevant to focus on the sustained complaints.
The amount that are actually charged, not the amount of complaints is almost irrelevant compared to the amount that actually get charged.
Okay, good points. I didn't think about that, but yeah, let's go back and recrunch it and see what we come up with.
And then if you're looking at it from the training perspective, I mean, is to make sure you're doing, obviously, going over policy with the officers on a regular basis, some of these, different sections at a time so that they're fully aware. And then make them aware of, hey, this is where the complaints are coming from, and this is why we're doing it. It's not just to bore you with all the policy. It's to make you fully aware of it so that, pops up so we don't get actual complaints. And then, like to Joe's point, the other ones, just putting them on their radar. These are where the complaints are coming from, guys, so that they're aware of where they're not getting administratively charged, but that's the ones that bother me, is the ones that are sort of, they end up being unfounded. But I think it's an awareness thing both on the public side and on the officer side to say, these are where they're coming from, so whatever you can do to, and then it makes your job easier, Tom.
Just one quick comment. In each department, I could probably sit here, if it was appropriate, and rattle off the names of officers that we see a lot. Most of them are very active. The sad thing about the system is that you really shouldn't consider those, but those complaints end up on the record.
Yeah.
And under now, they're permanent. That's the problem I have. There should be a way to, and I don't know what it is here sitting today, I guess working with people you could figure it out, how you're able to expunge those at some point. Maybe, I don't know what the time frame should be, I don't know what the procedure, but if a person that's convicted of a law violation can expunge their records, then I think that it just makes sense that an officer can have their record expunged for a complaint where there was no finding. There just has to be something that the legislature is going to have to address. 'Cause
The
I
state
think
of Maryland changed that. There used to be a process for that after
Yes,
3
I
years
agree.
under LEOBR, and they got rid of that.
Right.
You can no longer expunge any complaint.
I mean, I just feel that's not really, going forward, there should be a look at that, to try to come up with some means for these unsubstantiated or unfounded complaints.
And also what you were talking about, there's built into the Maryland legislation is a mandate to conduct something called an early intervention with police officers. So every department has in place an early intervention process. So if I'm getting a number of complaints, even if they're not sustained, we have a responsibility to look at all of them as a whole and have a discussion with the officer to see if there is an underlying issue, even though they weren't substantiated. So that is built into the law, and each department conducts those every so often, in 6 months, a year, whatever it is.
Oh, good.
So when it comes to the removal of the exonerations from the officer's record, it's kind of, we've talked about how this is a necessary legislature change that has to occur in Annapolis. I guess from our perspective is, do we as the PAB board here in Carroll County write our local senators and delegates with a recommendation letter to put this in for law? Or because this report goes to the Maryland State Police annually, do we request that they lobby on their behalf of whoever I mean, should we be proactively asking, or should we be asking the state police to ask on our behalf?
The end-of-the-year report, which we developed last year, and which we mentioned this in the end-of-the-year report, goes to the Carroll County Commissioners.
Okay.
And they, I guess, can take action with the legislature if they deem it to be that important.
Okay.
But to Joe's point, I think it would be good for us to make an added recommendation for them to actually reach out to the legislators. I mean, I think, and then what is your guys' take on time frame for that? What is a reasonable time frame to that? Obviously, the state may have had some problem with the 3 years with the removal of it, the whole entire thing from the law enforcement officer Bill of Rights. So what do you guys feel like? My perspective from a former elected official is I want my chief to be able to see, right? Is this officer going to be a potential problem if you hire them, right? When you're looking at hires, you guys want, I don't know if you have access to additional information that doesn't fall into that stuff, though, but you try to avoid those problems, obviously, when you're hiring officers, and I know it's tough to get people, still. So what are your thoughts on what's a reasonable time frame? Is 3 years good? Or is it longer? Is it less?
I think if the complaint is not founded and it's the officer exonerated, it shouldn't go on there at all.
Yeah.
But it does.
Is that what are your guys' thoughts on this? Like, what, I'm just trying to get a perspective, because when you're lobbying it, the way we'll get this stuff gets traction is when law enforcement is behind it, and then the legislature feels it's reasonable.
Well, under the current law, we have to do an early intervention system review. We do ours every 6 months. So if we do that review, look at any underlying issues, then it should be done with, in my opinion, and should be expunged.
So to Bill's point, you think that's the best way to do it? If there's not founded, it doesn't even go in there at all? Is that the
Shouldn't
way we
stay
should
on
be?
there. That's my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to remember that there's unfounded and there's exonerated. From my perspective, exonerated shouldn't go on there at all, because it's like clear, there's nothing wrong here. And unfounded, maybe it stays on for a few years, or, that's the debatable one. But.
No, that's a good point.
But the main one that I'm talking about is exonerations. They should not stay on there, because you clearly have data that says, no, not at all. They were right.
Well, unfounded should not go on there at all either, because unfounded means
It
the
didn't
charge has no basis. It can't be shown to be true. So
Right.
that shouldn't go on there either
Well,
one.
good point. Maybe unfounded should never even go on there. Exonerated maybe has a time frame, because exonerated means there was actually,
Exonerated means the officer acting in accordance with the policies and procedures and the laws of the department and the state.
right.
Unfounded means that the complaint cannot be shown to be true. So they're both, either one, they're both shouldn't go on there. But they do.
Understanding the legislative process like many of you do, I would suggest that you propose that and not be surprised if it's negotiated at some point. But if you start at 3 years, that might end up at 5 years or something.
And knowing how these things go and knowing the legislature we deal with, I think it's an easier sell to make sure that exonerateds are never put on to begin with, and maybe unfounded's removed after a certain time, and then you negotiate to try to get them eventually not put on there at all, but you have to start somewhere. And just knowing what we deal with in Annapolis.
Well, that's what happened this year on a completely different subject, which will come up on the agenda. There was a push to extend the time frame for dealing with complaints beyond a year and a day. And it started out with one bit of language, and it ended up at the final point as a set number of days. And there were some other changes too. And when that went to hearing, the police were very much in favor of it, but there were people that opposed it, adding a month on to the time frame. So, isn't always looked upon that way in other jurisdictions. So you have to have, good solid reasoning, you have to have good support. Obviously, you want the support of the police agencies, you want the support of key legislators and all that stuff, but sometimes even the most practical changes aren't always looked upon by others in the same light.
Good point.
I don't know what the technical language should be. I just think that there should be a real look at this to try to come up with a solution.
Yeah, I doubt that Carroll County is going to have much influence over the parameters of what that's going to look like. But it's certainly, from our perspective, we're putting it on the year-end reports. We're making our position on it clear that there should be a mechanism for removal, and that we're feeding that back at any centralized PAB or ACC opportunities that we have, and as well as our end of year to the commissioners themselves. So I think based on those three things, we're doing what we can. I'm not sure that we're going to have much more influence than that.
I mean, think about it this way. Any of you are going to hire a police officer, and let's say one police officer is from Maryland and one police officer is from someplace else. How do you determine whether they were a problem where they were? How do you do that, absent this current situation?
Well, you're going to do a very thorough background investigation that includes interviewing supervisors, the chief, whoever in the former agency. They sign a release of information that allows you to look at all of their personnel records. So you could thumb through internals and personnel records, files, things like that, to determine whether there was an issue.
And I think when an officer leaves a department in this state, his certification to be a police officer leaves with him. And when he goes to the next department, he has to be recertified. And I think they keep records.
You mean like if he was, for example, working for Hampstead, resigns, he applies for a job in Westminster Police Department, and is hired, then they would have to go through a recertification and a vote by the Maryland Police Training, whatever the...
So when somebody leaves an agency, we have to file something called an NPA, a Notice of Personnel Action. And there are boxes that you check that go to the Training Commission.
Training Commission.
So if somebody resigns under investigation, then you check that box. They're not eligible for recertification unless, if I were to try to hire that person, I'd have to physically go in front of the actual Police Training Commission and request a waiver, which they do not give very easily. So you have to leave in good standing in order to be eligible for recertification in another agency. And you also have to be up to date on all your training standards. So there's timeframes that you would need to go through a police academy again or go through a partial training again. And that's all based on the category that you leave the old police department under.
One of the things that we talked about is a time limit for expungement. But what about when an officer is actually charged? Should there be a time limit on that too? Anybody got any views? I mean, I can see where he's not charged. We need to get it off there, but what about when he's charged? What do we do? Does it stay on there? I mean, do we have a time
I mean,
frame for
again,
that
I just
too?
don't think it's going to be we can speculate, but I don't think it's going to be our decision to determine that parameter. That's going to be a statewide legislative position, right?
Yeah, that would be a statewide thing. And what we could do as a local PAB is make a
Make a
recommendation
recommendation,
about
just-
it, like
yeah.
write a letter to our delegate and senator saying we'd like to see this legislative action take place.
At least brought up, because I
Right.
think what happens is when they put these bills in, they either make their way through or they die in the committees and stuff, so at least, but once they're brought up, they tend to come back, and then they tend to gain support over time, so
Yeah.
it may take a while, but yeah. I would say the 3 years, maybe, to answer your thing, because that was what was in the old, right, law enforcement officers bill,
Stain
right?
complaints, yep, they stayed on the record.
Forever. Oh, interesting. All right. Well then, and maybe the legislature would be happy with that, right? Because they want some sort of accountability in this process. So yeah, maybe they're gonna stay on there anyway, right?
Okay, so never maybe.
Well, yeah, the sustained complaints, apparently they stay on there forever, but we could certainly make a recommendation on unfounded and exonerated, which I think is fair to the officers. I mean, we want to try to be fair.
Okay. All right, any other comments before we move on? From anyone? Okay. Let's move on to number 8, changes to Police Accountability Act. Back in March, I guess, May 13th, the governor signed an amendment, Senate Bill 533, to the Police Accountability Act, and it changed some of the timeframes that we have to follow when doing investigations. The first one, as I see it, and you have the handout of this change, is the case has to be investigated and delivered to the ACC within 334 days. I'm estimating that to be around 11 months, 365 minus 30. Previously, we did not have a time frame. The law said just as soon as possible. And I think there were some departments, hopefully not in Carroll County, that were sort of waiting for the year and a day to run out and have the ACC not have jurisdiction anymore, because that's what happens. But the legislature saw to close that loophole, and you're now, the investigating agency is now required to deliver that to the ACC within 334 days. The second part of it is that the ACC has 30 days after they receive it to investigate and provide the findings. I believe that if the ACC does not have enough information to make a determination, they can get another 30 days. But if you look down under number 3, the process, the entire process, no matter how much it goes back and forth, hopefully not more than once, it has to be 395 days before the ACC loses its jurisdiction. That's about a year and a month, I guess. So that extends, used to be a year and a day, and we are extended the ACC's jurisdiction to 395 days. And there's also some other changes in here about what happens if the officer is criminally charged, and what happens relative to what the ACC can and cannot do until that has been adjudicated one way or the other. And you can read that yourself. I don't think we'll run into that too much. But the other part of this is that the act shall take effect October 1, 2025. So that's June, July, August. So we've got about 4 months. The ACC is already beginning to amend some of its bylaws by which they're going to act upon it. I think Tom is working on changing their operations. But I guess if you all have any, if the officers, if the agencies, the police department agencies have any requirements or rules, policies on the way they handle the ACC investigation, certainly we need to keep in mind these new dates because they're written into the law now. Anybody, did I cover that pretty well? Any other questions, comments, criticisms from anyone? Okay, good. Moving right along, I have the next agenda item as updates from the law enforcement agencies. I'll go to the Sheriff's Department first.
Good morning, Colonel Hart with the Sheriff's Office. We have one incident to be presented at the next meeting of the ACC, and there's one incident that's under investigation this time. Other than that, I have nothing else.
I think we have
We
three.
actually have 3.
What's that?
3 cases from the sheriff's office.
To go in front of the ACC?
No. That's what Lieutenant Divelbiss sent us.
I have
3,
three for the meeting next week.
yeah.
You may be talking about moving
Okay. Sure, okay, the 3. I have one on my calendar. We'll look into that.
Okay.
Excuse me if I misspoke.
Yeah, we got 3 Command Central filings.
Okay.
Anything else, sir?
Thank you.
Let's move to the left to Chief Ledwell.
Good morning. I provided you with our quarterly update, our uses of force, our detention and search reviews, and within the last quarter, how many either complaints or inquiries we got. One was just a policy violation. It didn't involve a citizen. So that was handled within an internal investigation. And then our pending internal investigations in the final category. We have 2 that are still open and will be presented to the ACC.
Chief Lidwell, this is a very good report, and we appreciate it very much. We don't have a lot of time to look at it when it's presented to us here. Is there any way you can get this to us a day or 2 earlier so we could look at it before we have the meeting?
Sure.
Maybe send it to Bethany, and she could disseminate it?
Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, Chief Snyder.
We have nothing pending. I don't think we have anything on Tom's list.
No.
Nothing else to add.
Nothing, sir? Okay. Chief Baker?
Yes, good morning still. I think we have 1 pending, and then we also have 1 under investigation. And I would just like to, for the board's edification, make you aware that we have used the short form several times, and it's greatly appreciated and has made things a little more effective for sure. Thank you.
I don't want to get into cases, but Chief Baker, there was some rumor, I guess, about something that happened up in Pennsylvania. Is that one being looked at?
I can be general. That case involves an officer who was off duty in the capacity of being a coach. And the complainant, through some course, found out that he was a police officer and then wished to make a complaint on him. And I actually called Tom and we talked about it, and maybe a little unique. We weren't quite sure how to proceed, and I believe you had a conversation with the state's attorney as well.
County attorney.
Yep. And so anyway, we are proceeding with that, but that's the one that's under investigation right now.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, last but not least.
Good morning. We have no complaints pending. During the last quarter, we did have 1 use of force, which was investigated and found to be within policy. And as always, our public portal is still being used for things not related to complaints against officers. Somebody used our public portal to complain about a gentleman driving a motorcycle through a neighborhood. So, you know, again, the public portal supposed to be used for complaints against police personnel, but it's oftentimes used for other complaints that don't, complaints about other people's activities, not necessarily police. That's all we had.
Thank you, sir. Any comments from the board about it? Okay. All right, good. Thank you so much. This next agenda item, I kind of put it on here because it seemed like the first few meetings I came to, it was all about the PAB sort of telling the departments, you know, what it can do and what it, you know, sort of talking at you. I wanted to make this a forum where we could share information and people feel comfortable exchanging ideas. And I noticed that very often, law enforcement community, you know, it seemed like they didn't feel comfortable bringing up whatever we're bringing up whatever we want to bring up, but you guys are not being able to bring up what you want to bring up. So I included this agenda item in here. I called it Law Enforcement Time, to give you guys an opportunity to say anything you want to say about what the board is doing or what you think we ought to do or how you're working to improve things, or what you want to see happen, just anything at all that, it provides a time for you to just say whatever, anything you all that you feel you want to share. So it may be something that we don't keep on here because I don't get any input from you, but I certainly want to try it. So I'm willing to open it up to you guys to speak to whatever you want to talk about.
We did interject at kind of as we went through the meeting. If you would prefer, I guess we could wait to this section, but I feel like we addressed the topics as they came along.
Okay, I do too, and maybe that's the best way to do it. I just want to make sure we hear your concerns.
Yes, sir.
That's what I
Much
want.
appreciated.
I would just say, from the beginning of this process, and we're all learning, right? I think we're certainly light years ahead of where we were when we started. But my opinion has been that the board, and including Tom's folks in the ACC as well, has been very receptive, very open. And I think as far as communication goes, I haven't seen any issue.
Great, thank you,
I would echo that as well.
thank you. Okay. Well, we're down to number 11, other concerns in business. PAB, anything that we forgot? Anybody out in the audience have any comments, questions, concerns, criticisms? No?
Do we want to do another working session?
Yes, I think we
All right,
do.
we'll arrange that then later.
Is that what I'm hearing from you all? You'd like to have another working session? You think that's it?
Yeah, I think the next one we talked about was going to be more focused on outreach opportunities. And as we do that, just more of a heads up, I think it would be helpful to solicit input. We don't necessarily need to do it today, but I think we will be via email or some kind of forum requesting some information from the chiefs regarding that. So I think that would be a helpful input before we speculate as to what that process would be.
Okay.
And then what's the time frame for funding request for the county? Because I think that's one of the things we wanted to, when's the optimal time to request funding from the county commissioners to help? That was one of the things we talked about, so I just wanted to, is that the end of the year?
They just
or-
closed the budget session.
I think Bethany.
I know, for this year, right, we're kind of in a bad way for this year, but for the next, when do they start plugging stuff for the next fiscal year into
Well, I
the?
think they start pretty much right away, but it
Right
did
away.
just get approved, so you
So
can go
that's my point,
before.
is we should start putting it in early, because if you wait till late, all the money's allocated to somewhere else, right?
Yeah, you'll have to request a time. I can work with you on that. You can request a time to go before the
I just wanted to put that
commissioners.
on your
and-
radar now, so that when we have the meeting, because one of the things you're talking about is getting
Funding, yeah.
information. We're gonna need money to do that, right?
But you'll
So-
have to have this work meeting first and get a pretty set idea of what you think you'll need and what it's going towards before you can even see the commissioners, so.
And if you have any data on like what these typical outreach efforts cost, that would be helpful.
I have a Zoom meeting later this afternoon with all the people in my position from all the counties across the state. So that's one of my things I want to bring up is what kind of outreach are you doing and that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted
and
to throw it
so
on your
along-
radar earlier than later.
Yeah,
Okay.
along those lines, if any of the officers or the PAB has anything they want me to bring up, I am part of this group, so I can, the counties are frequently reaching out to each other and saying, hey, have you seen this? Hey, what do you do in this situation? So let me know.
Well, that and the legislation changes that we mentioned, maybe start putting it out to other people and get it on their radar too. Especially Prince George's, Baltimore City, and Montgomery County. If those three want it, it'll go through.
Okay, it sounds like we're down to the end of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Motion approved. Chief